All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Galena LitFest workshop, Abnormal Psychology in Fiction with Stephen Kolbe. My name is Larissa Disler, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the Galena Public Library in Galena, Illinois. And I've been organizing Galena LitFest since the very beginning when we started 10 years ago. So I'm really happy to see you here tonight so we can continue this festival. It doesn't work without all of you who attend. Some quick housekeeping, just to let you know, we are recording this. It will be on our YouTube channel, the Galena Public Library YouTube channel, within about a week, and it can be viewed there on demand. And we're also going to be live streaming to Facebook. Any questions throughout the presentation, you can put those in the chat window and we'll do our best to get to them. And I will introduce tonight's instructor. Stephen Kolbe started his career as a student worker for the prestigious literary journal, The Southern Review. He's now the author of the Ezra James Mystery Series, available through the Wild Rose Press and Harlequin Books. I'm super excited to turn this all over to him, so take it away.
All right. Thanks, Larissa. I'm glad to be here in Galena via Zoom. I hope that y'all have learn some things about abnormal psychology and fiction. And if you have questions, just drop those in. And I'm happy to pivot and talk about whatever y'all are interested in. So a little about me. Oh, there we go. All right, so who am I? I am a mystery writer. My series is the Ezra James series, and so far there are two books. They first came out with the Wild Rose Press, which is a small, not like super small, but independent press in upstate New York. And the first one did fairly well as far as like independent books go. And so Harlequin picked up the series and they have reissued it with new covers. The first one is out as a mass market, so it's like a less expensive version. And the second one is going to be coming out in August. So if you're interested in sort of things that I talked about today and want to go check those out, you can find them through Harlequin or find them through Amazon as ebook, trade back, and also a mass market. Very good. So a little bit about Ezra James. He is a FBI agent in Chicago, and sort of his character quirk sort of deal is that he does have bipolar disorder. And as a person with bipolar disorder, I thought it would be interesting to put that into my character, because usually mental illness is not tackled very much with the hero, especially in crime fiction. See, there's something in the chat. Oh, it's just my website. Okay, very good. All right. So I thought I would really like to cover bipolar disorder and do a fair job of it and paint somebody heroic who's not, causing the crimes in the crime novel, and also kind of demystify some of it. Years ago, there was a show called Homeland, and it's about a CIA agent, and she has bipolar disorder. And I don't know what the experience of the writers was, but it seemed like everything horrible and bad and disruptive that could happen with this character did happen in almost every episode. And I just thought, if that's what people are getting about bipolar, then it's probably not a very good message to be sending out there. So that was part of the impetus for writing this series. And just, we write what we know, and we write, some writers write from their own experience because they know it to be true and they know it to be authentic. And so I was just drawn to creating a character who is similar to myself. And in this series in particular, I focused on the bipolar side of it. So that's a little bit about me and my series, if you're interested. Let's see. Okay. So the term that I'll use for this presentation is neurodiversity. And I feel like that's kind of a hot topic term. But also it takes off some of the stigma. So what is neurodiversity? Um, well, here it describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. So there's no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving, and differences are not viewed as deficits. So the neurodiversity movement emerged during the 90s and aims to increase acceptance and inclusion of all people while embracing neurological differences. And so whenever we talk about like what is normal, and I teach high school, so like normal is very important to a lot of people to be normal. And what we mean by normal in neurological diversity or whatnot is really what is the average. And if you're writing about a character who is the average, they're probably not that interesting necessarily. And they're just kind of a composite of all sorts of people. So including more people that are not the composite average, you're going to be writing about more people that are genuine and authentic and wandering around in the world. So I think it's extremely important to think about neurodiversity when we're creating our characters. And I have kind of a lengthy process for creating characters. I do character work, character sheets. I have a notebook where I create all of my characters and map out lots of things about them. And one aspect is like flaws and strengths, but I also pay attention to the neurodiversity of the characters. How are they unique as a person? And how is that going to affect how they move through the story? So very important. I'm in trouble. There we go. All right. So so that's neurodiversity, but why write about neurodivergent characters? Um, you want to have stories that are interesting, and interesting characters are going to be unique. But also there is a lot of stigma right now, has always been, really. So we go into the etymology of the stigma, and the words that we use to talk about certain neurodivergent people have a lot of negative weight to them. So crazy is probably the most common, and it means mentally deranged. And it comes from a Middle English word to crush or to shatter. So like your brain is crushed or shattered, like you're no longer a person that functions. And insane is not any better, right? Sanus is healthy, so insane is not healthy. So you are not a healthy person. Lunatic is, one of these wonderful words that gets tied to the moon. We can think of like werewolves, other things that are monsters that are tied to the moon. This is not much better. And of course, when we hear Psycho, I obviously think of the 1960s film Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. And this is just a person who has like wild ideas and like a weird perception of reality, and we don't know what they're going to do. So none of these words sound like the sort of person that you would trust or that you would want to put as your hero. But that's exactly what I did with my series. And I think that it's been very helpful because, a large portion of your readership is going to have either some mental health issues or someone in their family who has mental health issues. And to read a character who is painted as, kind and thoughtful and heroic and intelligent, and they also have this issue that they're dealing with, and it allows them to feel seen, and they have like a dog in the fight. Like, this is a hero for me, or a side character for me, a love interest for me. I am not like ruined as a person because I've had trauma and because things haven't gone perfectly for me, and I don't feel emotions the same way as everybody or think the same way as everybody. I can still be a functional person in the world. And that's something that I think, it has not been, unfortunately, it has not been in our narratives for very long, and it hasn't been very present. So I think that's a huge reason to include more neurodiverse characters, is to fight that stigma. All right. This is going back a ways, but I think it's indicative of a lot of things that we still do. So one of my favorite authors is Nikolai Gogol, despite this story, which I actually find very interesting and fun. So Gogol wrote in the 1830s, The Diary of a Madman. And this is a story told through diary entries about a man who is trying to win over a young woman. And in the process, he is also losing his sanity. And it's a very strange story. It's a very surreal story. And if you've studied the Russian authors, it's a story that had a lot of great influence. Gogol had a huge influence on Russian authors for the next, probably until today. But the big ones that we think about, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, like Pushkin, Chekhov, they were all heavily influenced by Gogol, and a number of them wrote stories called Diary of a Madman in imitation or homage to Gogol. So this one is a high impact story for how they viewed mental health in Russia in the 1800s, and also how mental health has been portrayed in fiction since then. So it's a very comical, slapstick, strange story. The more crazy he gets, the more wild the story becomes. And it ends, of course, we would think tragically, but because it's a comedy, he plays it up for lots of laughs as the man believes that he's become the king of Spain while he's residing in a mental asylum. So there's a lot to pick apart about this story as far as how Gogol uses digressions, how to write a story through diary entries or epistolary, how to build comic tension. But unfortunately, the butt of the joke is, look at the crazy person, isn't he funny? So that's something that we are combating. Not funny, unless you have a very strange sense of humor, is The Rats in the Wall by H.P. Lovecraft. This is the point where I would ask, has anybody read any H.P. Lovecraft? But you all are on a Zoom. So I will just assume that some of y'all have read Lovecraft, either in high school or college or just for fun, because he's very strange. This one in particular is interesting. We follow a character who has kind of a long history, like a hereditary history of weird behavior. And there's a lot of mystery and mystique to it. So this American, Delapore, he goes back to England to track down his descendants. It's like his son goes off to World War I and then meets a captain or something. And this captain, Edward Norris, is telling him about all these wild stories about this big castle in England and all these weird things that happened, and it's somehow related to Delapore's name. So Delapore goes over to England. They investigate this castle, and they find very strange things. And underneath each strange thing, they find a stranger thing. So there's an altar to this religion where they did this sort of ritual. But underneath that foundation, there's another altar to a different religion that did a worse ritual. And it just goes on and on until you find out they were basically raising humans as cattle for various purposes. And it's at this point that Delapore goes berserk, loses his mental faculties. And yeah, it's bad. So not a comedy unless there are some comic things about it, but it is written for tragedy. But again, the climax is, here's a person who's insane And because of their insanity, they become violent, and this is this horrible thing. So H.P. Lovecraft, he wrote kind of sci-fi horror, and we see that a lot in the sci-fi horror genre, especially in the horror side of it, is insanity equals not just violence, but like extreme, disturbing sort of violence. And I don't know, it's painted as a very terrifying thing, and we get to see that in H.P. Lovecraft. Oh yeah, there's the rest of it. Also, there are rats on the wall, and only the cat can hear them, and Delacour. It's a weird story. Y'all should definitely read it. It is strange. I'm going to close that. All right. So what are some tropes that we see between the two? These are some tropes that come up a lot. If you're not familiar with the word trope, a trope is just like a theme or a motif, some element of story that pops up again and again. So years ago, I got into this website called TV Tropes, and my wife probably hates it because for like a year, all I talked about were these TV tropes. And what I loved about the website is that it had just thousands and thousands of tropes. And I think it's a tool for TV writers mostly, but it would have a lengthy description. So sort of like an encyclopedia of literary tropes. And it would have pictures and examples of the trope. And then at the end, it would break down like all these different examples of the trope in television, film, like books, video games, comic books. There were like a bunch of different categories. So I just went through all of these different tropes. And it was like a year, that's all I did. In the line at the coffee shop, I'm on my phone reading TV tropes. And it was really fun and kind of eye-opening. Because you think as you attack, you know, your work, that you need to do this like original thing, and you're just gonna like, you know, freehand it. Like I'm just gonna dive in and like write this thing that's amazing. Nobody's ever done it. I'm not gonna look at all the stuff that people have done. I've read enough or whatnot. But then you start going through all these tropes and you realize like, oh shoot, I use that trope all the time. And, you know, I've used these 5 and I didn't realize they were a trope or they were so popular. And just, it helped me to, I don't know, become more familiar with all of the tools of the trade. Because I had a pretty good foundation for language and storytelling, but I didn't necessarily know about all these tropes and how to use them. So when I was originally putting together this presentation, I thought, I'm sure there's a trope about this. And I found immediately 4 tropes that applied to both of these stories. So one of the tropes, mentally disturbed, is just what it means. You know, here's a person who has a disorder, and so they're disturbed and disturbing. They act funny. And then unreliable narrator. This is a really great trope and a really great technique, and it's extremely difficult to pull off. But I strongly advise everybody try to do an unreliable narrator. The problem here is that frequently, as soon as the author mentions, you know, like think about the yellow wallpaper, as soon as the author mentions, okay, this character is suffering from depression, or this character's anxiety, the old school of thought is, all right, now the author has indicated we have an unreliable narrator. They have mentioned that there is a difficulty with the person's brain, and now we can't believe them. So we can just discount whatever they have to say. And this might seem like, well, is that such a bad thing? Is that like so unfair? It is helping the reader know that you have an unreliable narrator. But think about people who read these stories in school or just on their own, and then they hire somebody, and that person has an issue one day, like maybe they run out of medication and they have to drive to the pharmacy in a different town or something. And so for whatever reason, they tell their boss, oh, by the way, I have bipolar disorder, and so I'm going to be gone tomorrow because I have to go do a med evaluation or something. So now this boss thinks, oh, shoot, I thought I could trust this person. But now I know that they have this problem, and I know they're probably going to be a liar, or their perception of things is not going to be, so good. So if they have an issue with another coworker, I know I'll just listen to the coworker because they don't have this unreliable problem. I don't need to listen to the person who's got this, med evaluation problem. So, that's again like it's stigma, you know, and that's something that we can combat with our fiction. Another trope, and this one should be debunked, but it is not. Insane equals violent. I don't know how many statistics they have out there about people with mental disorders are far more likely to be the victim of violence than the perpetrator of violence. But it is still comes up all the time. When there's like a mass event, some violent event out in the news, somebody's going to bring up, oh, well, they were mentally disturbed. And they were having visions, or like they weren't medicated, or they had depression, or they were anxious, or they were going through this traumatic thing. And it's easy for them, it's easy for people to get the idea that mental disorder means violence, and I can't trust that person. So that is another thing that is kind of baked into fiction about abnormal psychology. So the final one is funny schizophrenia. And I don't know what to do about that because, you read these stories and I don't know, maybe it's because I do have, mental health, like history. And I can see like the humor in a lot of the things that I have thought or that I have gone through, partially as a coping mechanism because it's easier to laugh at things that have happened. But I mean, you read the Gogol story and it is funny. So I don't know what to do about that. But again, it is not, it's not positive, right? So these four tropes are great examples of stigma, stigma that is, long history of it, and it's still being, worked through in people's fiction today. Okay. Does anybody have questions? Don't know if I see the chat box. Okay. So how do we stop stigma? I would argue that the best way to stop stigma is just through more accurate representations. So how do we do that? Well, descriptive writing is a great place to start. There are a lot of places to find out if you're writing about a character who has something that you don't have. There's a lot of places to go find out stuff about that, right? I'm working on a book right now that is a historical mystery. It's not part of my mystery series. And so it's based in part on real people. So I've been doing a crap ton of reading that I probably, some of it I would definitely not have done if I was not working on a historical, because they are real people. So I'm trying to read as much either that they wrote or that people wrote about them to give them a fair shake and to paint them as realistically as possible. Obviously, because it's historical fiction, I'm going to bring in a lot of brand new people, a lot of brand new situations, stuff that didn't happen. But I want to have a really solid base. And I think that if you were writing about a character, let's say with like dissociative disorder or something, you probably want to do a lot of research if you don't have any experience and you don't have any friends or family who have gone through that. So the DSM-5 is really good. It gives you a clinical view of it. Reading memoirs by people who have had that disorder or that experience is very good as well. When I was first diagnosed with bipolar, I was in college. And I don't know, I emphasized I was in college. And so one of my psychiatrists, I had like a series of them. She gave me a book. I think it was called Brain on Fire. Maybe that's not right. It was about a psychiatrist who had bipolar, and it was her memoir of learning like what it's all about, finding her, I don't know, symptoms, and figuring out a way to live a healthy life with that disorder. So reading a memoir of someone with it will give you a great view. Talking to a person, like doing an interview, set up an interview with a person who has that, will give you a realistic view. If we're just basing it on horror movies, then that's going to be like horrible, right? Because we won't have any of the actual, what's it really like? What are the realistic thoughts and mental sensations? What are the physical things that go along with it? So whenever I'm writing, friend of mine, his editor always had him, um, if he didn't have some sensory, yeah, so it might be Mind on Fire, but that might be a whole different book that I just like dropped in there because I couldn't remember the name of the actual book. And I will try to look it up later. If that's by the lady who's a psychiatrist, then that's probably right. But that might also be like a YA book that I saw somebody read once. So I'm not really sure. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Yeah, as I was saying, so a friend of mine, like if there are not sensory details other than sight, his editor will say, you have to add something to this page. So what's it feel like? What's it smell like? What's it sound like? Like you got to have more than just people looking around, because the great advantage that we have as writers of fiction is that over television and film, because we tend to think like, oh, it's so much easier. I could just show the film of it. I could just show everybody what the room looks like. That's so much easier. But the great advantage is that we can describe the other senses. So film can show you and you can hear it, but you can't see what it feels like, and you can't smell it, and you can't taste it. But in a book, you can do all those things. You can describe those things, and it connects to the brain of your reader in a much more visceral way than a film does, and they can have that experience. So we really need to emphasize the physical sensations. And if you're talking about a character who has a particular problem, like a health diagnosis, then how is that going to affect their physical sensations? And for a lot of them, there will be a lot there, right? And if you're ignoring all of that, then you're not going to show what the character is actually experiencing, and it'll just be a label that you've given them to explain away some behavior that you find strange. So DSM-4 or 5 now, there's lots of stuff on the internet. Just make sure it's a credible source, right? And then memoirs of people, we're talking to real people. These are huge. Okay. So this is another thing that you want to think about for your character. What does their daily life look like, right? What is an emergency look like versus what does contentment look like? How do they stay healthy? This could be medication and treatment. It could also be routines that they set to help them stay healthy. And then are there routines that are inflexible ones? So if you want to create a moment of extreme conflict and tension for a character, give them a disorder that they need medication for, and then put them in a situation where they can't have the medication, or they lose it, or their insurance has stopped paying for it. And anyone of your readers who has some, health difficulty where they need this to, stay lucid and functional, they will feel extreme panic at this. I am just talking about it and I'm feeling a little panic. So that's extremely important to think about, because you're not just writing a disorder, you're writing a human. So like these are all the daily things that go along with the human. You don't have to do like a day in the life chapter where they go to the post office and, get Popeyes for lunch. But you do want to think about what are all the things that this person relies on? What's their life like? If things go, if the shit hits the fan, what's their survival kit? What are they going to do? And then what do they do for entertainment? What do they do for relaxation? We're painting real humans here. Whoa, I did not know that was a thing. That's wild. So yeah, the more you talk to people and have experiences with people, the more you'll find out stuff. So that could be a huge part of that character's arc. The question is, or the comment is my nephew had to be off all meds and functional before joining the Air Force. So if you have a character who wants to join the Air Force and that is a policy that they have, then you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that difficulty and whether it's worth it or not for the character. Some things are more severe than others, and some treatment plans are temporary and others are permanent. So those are things to look into as well. And talking to people who know about this stuff is very helpful. And doing a lot of research, but I mean, I'm sure I've gotten stuff wrong in my books, and I have bipolar. So you're not going to do everything perfectly. Just trying to if you're making the effort and you're doing your best at it, that will come through, I think. All right, so this one says, what makes them come alive? All right, so we all have stuff in our lives that makes us round people, makes us real people, and has nothing to do with our IQ or our how diverse we are neurologically. So think about those talents they have, hobbies, and also think, it's important to think, is this a very stereotypical hobby for the person that I'm trying to paint? I think autistic characters with autism are very popular at the moment. And a lot of them have like a extreme fascination with train sets. So if you're creating an autistic character, maybe don't have them have the same hobby that you've seen all of the characters have. I read a book a couple years ago, by Catherine Heine. It's called Standard Deviations, and it's a woman, and it's about her living in New York with her husband and her son is autistic, has autism, and he's really into origami. So origami becomes increasingly important to this woman because she has to get her son to all of these different origami things. And because he's highly intelligent, high IQ, and he's just determined to do origami, he goes really far in origami, and it creates extreme complications for this woman's life. But it's very funny and very interesting. So think about those sorts of things and doing research and just trying. It's like the same thing with the tropes, before I studied tropes, I was using tropes without knowing it. And now that I've studied tropes, I can use them more knowledgeably and less stereotypically. Also think about the relationships. There was this show On the Spectrum a couple years ago, Dating on the Spectrum, something like that. And it showed the massive difficulties that some people on the autistic spectrum have with starting romantic relationships and maintaining them. And so that can be very interesting to look at how is their brain affecting their relationships, because it's not just you that's going through it. It's whomever you're with, right? How's it affecting the family? How's it affecting the spouse? How's it affecting the children? Because some people, there's very minimal and then others, it can be very difficult. So also beliefs, how does their perspective affect their outlook? How do their beliefs work with whatever they have going on? If somebody has like severe depression, are they very religious? Does that help them or does it hurt them? Are they like, I don't know, extremely into Immanuel Kant? Does that help them or does that hurt them? Do they have no beliefs? And is that a cause to their depression or is it because of their depression? That's very interesting because not everybody with clinical depression is going to have the same beliefs about anything. So again, we're painting various versions of this. And in doing that collectively as a whole, that's one thing we can do to fight stigma is just, okay, well, you have this stereotype of this thing, clinical depression, looks like Eeyore, right? No, it can look like 100,000 different characters. And that's a small thing that we can do individually, but it's a really large thing, I think, that we can do as writers as a whole. Okay. My first book, it follows Ezra after he has had a major manic episode that did spiral and cost him a lot of things. So when we meet him, he's not at the FBI. He is working security at his old school. It's like the SRO. And his wife has left. She's picked up and moved to Kansas City. And so he, at the very beginning, we realize, all right, this is a man who is at bottom and he is rebuilding. So this is a very interesting plot, I think, because we can see how will a person go about rebuilding their life. We're going to definitely see a dynamic character who's going to go from here at the beginning. They're going to go through all the travail of the plot, all the turmoil. They're going to find success. And at the end, they will be changed as a human. And I find those plots a lot more compelling. I'm kind of an outlier for the mystery genre because, typically in a mystery series, it's fairly evergreen. And by that, I mean, not a lot changes. So you have a character, he is this type of person. These are all of his things or all of her things. Maybe they're in a relationship or maybe not. By the end of solving the mystery, they're all of these things, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And we've moved a couple inches in their personal life. And I don't know why that is so typical to the mystery genre. I know Agatha Christie would write 20 plus books about one detective. So her difficulty was she kept writing characters who were about to retire. And then she had to write 20 books like, oh, wait, he's not going to retire. She's not going to die. They're still going to do a bunch of stuff. But the characters don't really change very much. And that's because the emphasis is on the plot and the emphasis is on solving the mystery. It's not necessarily on the character. For my book series, especially for the first one, I really wanted to dig into this story because this is the story that I'm drawn to and it's very, from my experience. So I really wanted to tell a story that would show change and show this rebuilding for him. So by the end, is everything perfect? No, but he makes like a lot of progress, I think. And then, oh yeah. So you want to think about how does this change? What do they learn? How do they reflect? And then what is the new normal going to look like? So I won't spoil my book for telling you what the normal looks like. But just he's trying to work for some things in his life and he's got to figure out what's important, but also what is within his power to do because we can't do everything. So then the next book starts with the new normal. And I don't know. We'll see what happens with the third book. All right. Trauma is also important when we are considering mental health. I am not a psychiatrist or like a neuroscientist. I have a master's degree in English, British and American literature. So I have my experience. I have what I've learned from other folks, from their experiences personally. And then I have just all of the many, many books that I've read about the topic, just as a an amateur hobbyist of the brain. And one thing that comes up a whole lot is that genes are not set in stone. So genes are potential, and like this is what the neuroscientists people say, and the psychiatrists say. You have potential, and then things turn on those genes or turn off those genes. So it's the whole field of epigenetics, which is way beyond me. I don't understand, but I do understand that trauma can be a huge part into the story of somebody with a mental health diagnosis because something had to happen to set the ball rolling. And it doesn't have to be like an enormous thing, somebody broke in and murdered everybody in the house and beat the person half to death. That would be huge trauma, and that would certainly do a bunch of stuff. But also just, having parents who have issues and don't like try to love their children, but do it imperfectly. Having a lot of chaotic stuff happen when you're young. There's all a number of things. And I think reading memoirs and reading about personal experiences of people and talking to real individuals will give you some ideas about, okay, that seems like an important thing that they're saying, and that seems like that could have got some balls rolling for their life. All right. So you could do this through flashback, through dialogue, hinting, like that kind of like subtextual way to talk about things, or through reactions. You could have a character who, a dog enters the room and they shut down entirely. Like they're very extroverted, very bubbly, like they know everybody, they're very friendly. A dog comes in and now they're like clearly not having a good time. Like something traumatic is going on in their brain. There are alarm bells and they have stopped like interacting with people. That could be a hint that we then find out later some horrible thing has happened in their past about a dog. That's just one example. Also be thinking about how it shapes and affects the way that they see the world, how they interact with people. Trauma leaves like a lot on people. So people have biases about certain things in life. And sometimes it's just, how they were raised. Other times it's because of how they have experienced life. And those are interesting things to pull apart, to unravel, to see why is this person doing this. I don't speak for all writers, but I think that one of the things that has drawn me to writing is just I'm very fascinated about people, and I want to know like why are they doing that? Like why is that how they're reacting? Like what's going on back there in their brain? Is it something that I said, or is it something like the way that I said it, or does it have nothing to do with me? I'm also an overthinker. But I'm just always fascinated, like, why did they do that thing? Because people do wild stuff, not just people with mental health disorders do wild stuff. People do wild stuff all the time, every day. And why did they do that weird thing, that very abnormal thing out of the ordinary? Why would they do that? It makes me curious. And if you're writing for a large audience, people are going to be curious. So having people do strange things and then pulling it apart, slowly as the book goes along, that's mystery, even if you're not writing the mystery genre. So they're going to be curious about that, and you'll give them little clues along the way so that by the end, they hopefully know, okay, this is why this character did this thing. And now I have a better appreciation of them and psychology and like humans in general. So that's another reason why it's quite important to do justice to this, because not everybody's going to sit around and read books on mental health disorders or read books about neurobiology. They are going to pick up fiction and they're going to glean some things from that fiction. So we should try to be as authentic and as realistic and as accurate as we can, because they are learning stuff and they're either going to be learning the right stuff or the wrong stuff. And that is dependent upon us. So in the end, reiterate, remember you are creating person. So people are complex, they're contradictory, they're full of flaws and secrets, and sometimes a disaster, people are. And that's okay, because even a disastrous person can do a terrifically heroic thing. One of my favorite books to teach, well, maybe not to teach, I love Tale of Two Cities. And if you've read Tale of Two Cities, if your high school English teacher forced you to read Tale of Two Cities, I applaud them, because it's very difficult to get through. Students always pitch a fit about it, but it's the ending that's so wonderful. And it's just so good. So if you've never read Tale of Two Cities, you should do yourself a favor and go read Tale of Two Cities. It's a bit of a slog in some places. You might need to know some more about the French Revolution before you get too deep into it. But the payoff is so good, and it ties into all this stuff. So, yeah. All right. So another book that I really love this book, and it is not good as far as stigma goes. But it's a case study for y'all to read and decide for yourself. The first question is, does Jonathan Latham, treat Tourette syndrome fairly? And if he did treat it more realistically and less comically, would the book as it is still work? And I'm trying to remember the author, or not the author, the actor who played the detective in the film. It came out a couple years ago. He's great, and I can't remember his name. He's like Yale educated, I believe, is the one I'm thinking of. Anyway, he's a great actor. I really wish I remembered this off the top of my head, but American History X. I can't remember. So he does a fine job, but the film is terrible. So I challenge y'all to go read Motherless Brooklyn. It's first person and first person Tourette's. So I have a friend at our church. He has Tourette's, and I would hate to mock him for his Tourette's because he's a great guy. But the book, it works because of the Tourette's, because it's stylized, it's written, it's baked into the style, and it's a humorous book. It's an intriguing book. There's so much fascinating stuff going on. And if you've read the New York trilogy, I feel like Latham is kind of piggybacking a little bit off of the New York trilogy, Paul Auster, because there's noir, there's questions, but the questions create more questions. There's uncertainty, there's unreliability, and it's fascinating. But I do wonder, is this making fun of a mental health disorder? Is that the butt of the joke, or is that a tool? And I don't know. That's for y'all to decide. I see another question. Edward Norton. Thank you. That's awesome. Okay. I don't know how I forgot him. I've watched like everything he's ever done. So nice. I like that. All right. We did have a couple questions ahead of time, so I'm going to start with those. Question number one. So we had a participant who is working on a thriller. So thriller is in like the mystery genre-esque, and the person has major trauma in their life. They're the antagonist, but the author doesn't want to make them like an unredeemable villain, like a Darth Vader type. So my question to this is, is the character going to be a villain or is it an antagonist? So there's a slight difference here. So for an antagonist is not necessarily a bad person, like good versus evil. So I might have a protagonist who wants a good end. They want to win the Kentucky Derby. I don't know. I don't know. I thought of that as an example. And then I have the antagonist. They want to, guess what? Win the Kentucky Derby. So they both want the same thing, but they're working at cross purposes. That's one very light example of an antagonist. In a thriller, the antagonist, I'm guessing, is going to be like a murderer, some sort, right? That's the most common crime in crime novels. It's the like ultimate crime is murder. So if your antagonist is a murderer, then you're looking at villain. So with an antagonist, we can look at goals, reasons, backstories, understandable motivations, even if they're distorted. With a serial killer, I mean, it's going to be hard to not make them totally unredeemable. So what I would say is maybe focus on the trauma is part of it. So if you have a character like Charles Manson, ton of trauma, right? There's all this trauma, and then he starts making decisions based on what he wants to do. So your character has to have goals, and with Charles Manson, they're very devious goals, and maybe he wants to achieve some good thing, but it's so twisted in his brain the way he's trying to achieve it that will give us an understanding of him. It won't say like, oh, we should all be buddies with Charles Manson, but it will tell us, okay, that is, I guess, a logical reason, right? He saw the world as racist and he thought this is a really bad system. We're going to topple it. Great. How are we going to do this? Murder celebrities? Like, what? Okay. And then the rest of the book, you could figure out why is that, how is that connected in this person's brain? So, and Amy Dunn from Gone Girl, antagonist, we kind of understand some of her points because, what is it? Nick is her husband in Gone Girl. He's not great, right? In the first half of the book, we find out, no, this guy's not great. Like there are some reasons. But then in the second half of the book, we find out, oh, she's not great either. So, but that's a very different antagonist, very different villain from, say, Iago from Othello, who has no motivation, just evil. And he's just twisted and he wants a bad thing to happen for people. And so he's got this thing in him that wants to do this thing. And one thing to think about with, especially with the thriller genre, with crime in general, is this thing called psychopathy and sociopathy. So does my character have psychopathy? How did they get it? Is my character a sociopath? How did they get it? Is there anything that could happen that would change them? Or is this just like a person who will have to die at the end or go to prison? And, we don't necessarily have to like the villain, especially in the crime genre, but we do need to understand the villain because we want to understand the motive as well as the means and the method. So like the age of a really amazing method is gone because the golden era exhausted the methods for the crime genre. But there's other stuff too. And I think a lot of that is in the motive. We're still trying to figure out people's motives and how the brains work. And so diving into that will be interesting and it will explain for your reader without necessarily saying, well, I know they're a murderer and they're a psychopath, but look, they have puppies. So we like them because of the puppy. You could have them like puppies, and that would be an interesting quirk to their character. But I think understanding them is more important than trying to make them completely, redeemable or likable as a character. That makes sense. Not even sure if the person who asked that question is in the chat today. Okay. A second question we had, how do you create resolution to the story when it's due to mental health without saying they have an illness? That's tricky. Those without any mental health struggles are few and far between, right? I have a certain family member who would probably say that she's perfectly fine and dandy, and she doesn't need to go talk to those people and waste money and dive into all of her self-centered problems or something like that. Oh no, I got a little personal. But obviously there's stuff going on in her past, and there's stuff going on in her brain, whether she has identified it and wants to deal with it or not, it's there. And so I think baseline, everyone could have something going on, and we see through their behavior what's going on, whether they're aware of it, whether the author tells us, we are aware. Okay, that's not normal, or okay, that seems like a coping mechanism, or that seems like an overreaction, or we are assessing the characters as we go, and we're going to pick up on all that stuff. So then, especially with mystery and thriller, major conflicts are going to have antecedents. So a serial killer doesn't just have a perfectly functional brain, perfect experiences in life, no exposure to trauma, and then decides, Wednesday's kind of boring. I know a way that I'm going to make Wednesdays more interesting from here on out. So looking at those antecedents is interesting, and we could do that with backstory. We can also do that with other characters and their family, a character who's, being involved in the resolution or in the conflict, in the climax rather, their uncle or dad or mother or somebody in their history has this very easily diagnosable, very apparent issue. And so we know genetically there's a very big potential that that's hanging out in this character. So that's another way to do it through subtext, through hinting. And then also, if you're talking about violent acts, a lot of stuff has to come together. So the House of Sand and Fog, a bunch of stuff comes together. I think that's Andre Dubus. There's stuff going on mentally. There's stuff going on circumstantially. There's characters interacting, and it all comes together. It all collides. And if this, and this hadn't happened first, then the last domino would not have fallen. So I might be giving too general of an answer, but it is a large question. So the last thing I'll say about that is you get to decide what to explain to the reader and what to leave ambiguous. And if your beta readers are super confused, then maybe you need to explain more. If they seem to get everything or are comfortable with the ambiguity, then roll with it, right? Some of my favorite books end with ambiguity. You don't know all the parts and all the pieces, especially in mystery genre. Historically, you wrap up everything, you explain everything. The detective X, Y, and Z does the whole 9 yards. And I don't love that. So I don't do that as much. I leave some stuff like a little bit of a mystery still. And I think that's acceptable. So, all right. Does anybody have any other questions? You could type them or speak them. Okay. Yes.
Hi. I might not phrase this correctly. It's a little confusing for me myself. How would I write a story? I guess I'm in the beginnings of stages of it and planning it, but where the antagonist is the person that it's like the crappy version of the protagonist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that.
And toward the end, it's like the protagonist comes out and the antagonist goes away rather than, I guess, starting with having a protagonist and antagonist. It just does not sound, would that work?
Sure, if you can make it work.
All right then.
Yeah. It reminds me, when I was in college, I took an abnormal psychology class and I did this research paper that ended up getting a B, which I'm so mad about. And I focused on twin studies because, so when I was in college, my professors would like reveal themselves, like show their true natures. And I was always like, well, I'm gonna write against that then. And my professor, he was like, oh yeah, mental health disorders, they make people more creative and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right, I got my research topic. So I looked at these twin studies, amongst other things, and it showed, well, it didn't show, but what they found was if you had a person who was a twin, like identical twin, separated at birth, raised by different families, they do all these tests on twins because they're like, you have the same brain. We got to find out about all of the nurture stuff. And so one of these studies found that if the twin who had schizophrenia or bipolar or something else that was supposed to make them more creative, if they were very creative, like a painter or writer or composer, they found that the other twin who was raised in a different family and didn't have a traumatic upbringing and didn't develop that mental health disorder was also just as creative, often working in similar creative fields. So I was like, boom, proved. And the professor, he did not like that. But he gave me a B, not a F. So I guess that's all right. But my point was like, that's a bad message, dude. Like to tell somebody you're creative because of your mental health disorder. Well, what happens when I go through treatment and I can't write for a couple months? What should I do? Should I just get off my meds? And that's a popular thing to do. So I was very kind of like, I don't know, triggered about it. And then I got a B, but it was worth it because I learned stuff and he's, whatever. I don't know where he is. So I like that idea of like it's the same person, but like two different versions. And I
Yeah,
think looking at some of those twin studies might be beneficial.
I think so. Also, my son is 22 and he has bipolar 1. He was diagnosed when he was about 13.
Oh wow.
One of the things that I've noticed that is a sign that he's about to kind of go through a cycle is that he gets very strange about certain clothing touching his skin, or he'll wear multiple shirts and it just, and it during the summer, and you're like, dude, it's like 105 degrees outside. What are you doing?
That's
But
wild.
that's just how he feels comfortable. And so that was just something I thought I'd share.
Thank
It's
you. Yeah, that's wild because yeah, I have bipolar 1 as well. So there's 3 types of bipolar and that's, the bad one. So I have never had that experience. So that's really cool. So you can have something and feel like I'm an expert of this thing. And then you find out from somebody else with the exact same diagnosis, like, oh wow, they've got a whole other thing going on. And I would have never thought that was a thing. So thank you for sharing that.
no problem.
I think there's something else in the chat. Cool. Nice. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? This is called wait time in education. All right. Well, if you all have any questions or you think of anything, anything that I started to go into and didn't go completely, you can always email me. My email is right there.
All right, and I will thank you as well. I
Thanks
appreciate
for
your
having me,
time
Lisa.
and this worksheet. Of course, we'd love to have you back sometime doing something else. That'd be great.
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm glad I didn't have to fly all the way to Illinois. It would have been nice, but expensive.
Yeah, Zoom is a really great tool.
Definitely.
Allows us to have a lot of great presenters from anywhere and everywhere.
That's awesome.
So we love it. And thank you so much. And again, the presentation was recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel within the next few days to a week. And I wish you all good night.